righty. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, good morning, or good night, wherever you are listening from. My name is Jose Vega, and I am a congressional candidate running for Congress in the 15th Congressional District, also known as the Bronx. If you're new here, this is part of a thing we do every Friday, almost every Friday, where we read Edgar Poe, guided by our friend Dennis Speed. But before we actually read Poe, it is my job to brief you on what is going on this week. Now, of course, I did this intervention. Hi, Mike. Thank you for coming on here. Mike Will now, who's running for Congress in the 11th District of Florida, has decided to pop into our stream. Thank you kindly for joining. Actually, you know what? I'm glad you're on, Mike, because this is actually very important. I realize that this might be your first time coming on here. A lot of people don't know about the history of Edgar Poe and how much of a patriot he actually was. And hopefully when we get into that, in a few minutes here, you will begin to understand why uncovering the real history of who Edgar Poe actually was is very important to the founding of our republic and maintaining it, and also important for the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country, which is why we do it. I understand my camera's coming in and out. That's just the reality of having a lot of window tabs open on a MacBook, which I am closing right now as we speak. So you might see a little more stuttering. So anyway, going back to it though, we had this intervention where I confronted my opponent, Richie Torres, in the Bronx at a coffee shop. And just in case you haven't seen it, I will do my due diligence of playing it for all of you here now. So let's see if I can pull this up. Do this, share screen, do this, share tab audio. Yes, here we go. Congressman, you eat here? Really?
I live in the neighborhood.
Wow, that's awesome. It's hard because people don't often see you in the neighborhood. That's crazy. Let me tell you something. What is it about you and endless war? You just seem to love war, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, the thousands of dead Palestinian children that you funded. Don't you think that's crazy?
Why do you run cover for war?
Do you agree or disagree with the DNI that the war in Ukraine is pretty much over and that the Trump administration is trying to... I'm a tool of the Kremlin? Seriously? You know what is reality? That you are responsible for the death of thousands of Palestinian children, thousands of Ukrainian children. You love funding war. You love funding genocide. Listen, the crowd prince of genocide is here, thinking he can just get away by sitting here and eating comfortably while there are thousands of Palestinian children who have to suffer because of the decisions of this guy, who is either responsible, since he's in the Congress, for doing absolutely, nothing about it, or the fact that he gets funding from AIPAC.
Cover for war criminals. Why do you use our voice
Congressman,
to support the erasure of Palestine?
Congressman, no matter where you go in the Bronx, people hate you because they know the truth about you, Congressman. They know what you really are, a sellout, an AIPAC sellout, okay? All you do is get paid by the Israeli lobby. You are nothing. You're a joke of a congressman. You have no real principles whatsoever.
Why do you use my voice to whitewash war crimes, Richie Torres?
Congressman!
Why do you use my voice to run cover for war criminals like Bibi Netanyahu? What do you get from Israel to run cover for them? You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace to your constituency. You should resign. You should be primary.
Take care,
Shame
Congressman.
on you, Richie. Don't touch me.
So that was our intervention that we did this week. And it's actually the second time that I ran into Richie Torres. I made a video about the first time I ran into Richie Torres, but for the sake of time, I'll just recap it. I attended a holiday party that was happening here in the Bronx. Turns out he was there too. It all happened too fast for us to start recording. Basically, I went up to Richie Torres and I shook his hand, or tried to shake his hand. He wouldn't shake my hand. He was actually pretty freaked out that I was there. It was the first time I met him this week, not the one you just saw. And I just started asking him questions like, how does, he said that he would work with more Zohran Mamdani now that Mamdani is mayor. Well, is he going to work with me when I'm the congressman of this area? Or, how does he sleep at night, knowing that he's funding the death of thousands of innocent children, and he was just saying, like, you weren't invited here. And I said, yeah, well, lighten up, it's Christmas. But this video that you just saw has, as far as I can see, over 1.5 million views across all different platforms. So, for example, on X alone, I believe that video has 375,000 views. On TikTok, it just crossed 600,000 views. And on Instagram, it's another 400,000 views. And then it was translated into Arabic. Yes, that's right. It was in Arabic subtitles. In fact, I will just put up the image. Let's see here if I can put up my Instagram story. Yeah, here we go. Okay, let's do this. Hopefully this happens quick. Here we go. Yeah, so as you can see here, this is Al Jazeera. They translated the into Arabic, and actually, let's see, if you look at the post, you can see a lot of comments like this person. Actually, you know what? Bad idea. I'm not going to read people's comments live that I haven't read, but my point is they were very supportive. Now it's being translated in different languages. Earlier in the day, I also saw a Russian subtitling of this video. I didn't save the link, but I can probably go finding it. Now, it's important that this intervention in specific, you see it's getting translated in both Arabic and Russian, probably Chinese too, although I haven't looked on Red Note yet to see if that's the case. But why is it that that's important that in these two languages specifically, this intervention is getting translated? Well, because these interventions serve different purposes beyond just calling out the person in front of you. And it's sort of indicative of how a nonviolent direct action principle works. Oftentimes, when you are engaging in nonviolent direct action, especially against somebody who's committing an injustice, oftentimes the intervention may or may not affect the person that you're intervening on, but also the people who are watching around as well. Those are the people who are just as important to affect because they're watching this before them. They're seeing what's happening, and they're the ones who are going to be affected. In fact, this happened during the civil rights era when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was thrown in jail in Birmingham, and James Bevel and others organized children to go out and protest. And as a result, the police were called, and the police started water hosing kids, and they released dogs on the children as well, started putting children in jail. Kennedy, the President Kennedy got a call from other world leaders saying, how can I work with any country that puts 8-year-old children in jail and has dogs biting these children? See, so, with the sort of current circumstances that we find ourselves in now, as Helga Zepler-Rouge talked about it this morning on the International Peace Coalition call in dialogue with people like Rachel Clark and of Veterans for Peace, as well as Larry Johnson, who's a former CIA analyst, we see a thing where European countries, or at least leaders of these European countries, are acting like complete buffoons, trying to continue the war effort, trying to make sure that Ukraine, quote unquote, fights till the last Ukrainian, only ensuring more and more of a death in the meat grinder, over 1 million dead Ukrainians. Now, the Russians have this thing where they will, as they changed their nuclear doctrine last year during the Biden administration, they will use a nuclear weapon if they feel as if there's an existential threat upon their country. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be struck by a nuclear weapon first. For those of you who like history, you may know a little bit about the Napoleonic Wars, right? When Napoleon made it to Moscow, what did the Russians do? They burned Moscow. They pulled out the water pumps the night before Napoleon arrived. They let all the people out of Moscow. Moscow was basically evacuated, and they burned Moscow because they said, you are not having this. And they never gave Napoleon the victory. So when you see the Russians talk about how they will use a nuclear weapon if they feel an existential threat to their country, and that doesn't involve nuclear weapons, they genuinely mean that. But I also say that because if it truly was the case, as Larry Johnson was saying, that the Russians aren't going to believe any European leader, aren't going to believe the president of the United States or anybody they're negotiating with, if that really is the case, why would the Russians continue to maintain a form of restraint and discipline to not use the nuclear weapon? Because they do believe in something. And I happen to believe it's the various citizens of these various countries, whether it's the citizens of the United States, whether it's the citizens of Europe, who are much more reasonable than the leaders. I think whether or not President Trump can actually negotiate the end of this war in Ukraine, I think the thing that matters more is if people will settle in their minds that in order for that to be a reality, for there to actually be peace in the Ukraine or in Gaza, it's going to require people standing up and intervening, just like we did all of 2023, end of 2022, 2024. A lot of you have been standing up and calling out rightfully the warmongers, like Cory Booker. That's one of my favorite interventions other people have done, and calling out the hypocrisy of all these AIPAC politicians. See, because it's not about us. The world just wants to know, are there Americans who are not going along with their crazy government? And what we saw with the intervention that I did was the response. Thousands of Americans commenting, sharing, liking it, and retweeting it, saying, yes, more of this. That's why we do these interventions. And I encourage all of you who are watching this to stand up and speak the truth no matter what. So that's the end of my briefing. And I'm going to bring in our friend Dennis Speed. And just before he starts, I just want to encourage all of you again, by the way, I want to give you guys a little update. We started out with a goal to raise $25,000 before New Year's. And so far, we're almost at 12,000. So we're almost halfway there. If you can donate, go to votevega.nyc and help bring us to our New Year's goal. So with that being said, Dennis, are you there? And can you hear us? And can we hear you?
Yeah, I'm here. How about you? Can you hear me?
Yep. You're good. Loud and clear.
All right. Well, great. So basically, because a lot of what's going to happen tonight will be what Kynan has to say. I just want to wish everybody Merry Christmas. I like being specific. I like also a Happy Hanukkah. And then, of course, there's Kwanzaa as well, if you're into that as well. Rather than that, Happy Holidays, which I find very both vanilla and weird. It's sort of like talking about President's Day instead of talking about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or whoever you're talking about. It's like talking about Europeans as opposed to talking about people like from France or from Italy or from Germany. It's like talking about Africans, which you hear all the time, right? You can't talk about Ghanaians. You can't talk about Kenyans, South Africans, Libyans, Egyptians. I mean, how hard is it to say that? How come people can't talk about the 54 different countries from Africa, Cameroonians, right? Well, what's the problem? It's Congolese is right? And notice, so that's the same idea. And the issue is not language. The issue is ideas, the ideas behind language. Why are we talking about something called the Middle East? Middle East of what? What's wrong with Southwest Asia? What's wrong with Northeast Africa and Southwest Asia? The reason you use that term is colonial. The reason we talk about an Israel located where it is has to do with British colonialism. The reason that we talk about the boundaries of the nations of Africa and the way that they're all set by colonial regimes. And while we can say, oh, well, that's a long time ago, is it? How long ago a time was it before there was an AI that every time you get on to do a Google search tells you, before you get a chance to search anything, what you're supposed to think about, how you're supposed to search it? See, so there is a need to understand how the mind is being manipulated by the acceptance of the usage of certain ideas or terms, like the term Edgar Allan Poe. We've talked about the fact that Edgar Poe never called himself Edgar Allan Poe, but everybody else calls him that. It's all over every history book. It's all over his own writings, the things he wrote. Why is that? And why is that important? We've taken that up in other weeks. This is not academic points. This is the essence of politics, the essence of what people like to avoid when they talk about this concept of conspiracy. I've often said when people say, well, conspiracy theory, there's no such thing as conspiracy theory. I say, well, I'm a conspiracy practitioner. I believe in practicing conspiracies. I believe that Ben Franklin, who lived in England, by the way, for 18 years, between about 1757, I think it was, and 1775 approximately. He was there the whole time. He was living there. Why was he doing that? He had a conspiracy, and the conspiracy was not merely the American Revolution. He was trying to win people in England over to actually creating some kind of equity in the United States. Now, for people who think, well, that didn't involve slavery, it didn't involve other things, well, you'll need to talk to my wife, who will tell you a lot of things that will blow your mind about what this country really was about, how it actually was created, and about the international combination that it was involved in trying to overthrow slavery and dictatorship in various parts of the world by making sure that happened in America. I said it, that's the way it was. And it was not done by just a bunch of, the normal cast of characters that you think about or are told about. And you have to know, and this is the kind of reason that we're doing this history. Now, Edgar Poe's from the Bronx. So just first of all, the reason we talk about him as opposed to many other people you might have picked is he died. His last home was in the Bronx. His wife did die in the Bronx. He did not personally die in the Bronx. His last writings were all done in the Bronx, including one of the most important things he wrote, which was a long book on science. It was actually, as he called it, a poem. He didn't want to consider it as a scientific text, called Eureka. We're not going to be discussing any of that tonight. What we're going to be discussing tonight is something we've taken up for the last couple of sessions, which is that there is an assertion that Edgar Poe spent time in Russia, attempted to go to Greece, spent time also in France, and was part of a group that was operated by the Marquis de Lafayette, who fought in the American Revolution, and who was the head of a military society that had been created in the United States called the Order of Cincinnatus. I won't say why it's called that right now. And so some people have said that this is true. Other people say it's definitely not true. Some of the people, including the people that didn't like Poe, who were his biographers, say it's true. And then people who like Poe and always try to defend him say it wasn't true. And the reason we're looking at this is because by asking the question, why does it matter that much if a poet from the United States went to Europe or he didn't go? Why is there a fight about that? Why is there a dispute about that? And so what we're going to do is first have Kynan go through what we've established about the basic chronology. And maybe what we'll do is get a chance to refer a little bit to some of what people who don't believe it have to say. Our job is that we're trying to discover whether it's true or not. So, Kynan?
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot, Dennis. So I'm just going to put this up for people to see. This was from one of Edgar Poe's biographers, Rufus Griswold, who's tarnished his name largely. I mean, the things you associate with Poe, alcoholic, opiate abuser, etc., mainly comes from him. But as we had established last week, he had admitted something which was quite interesting about Poe's life. And I'll just read this really quickly. In 1825, Poe went to Jefferson University at Charlottesville in Virginia, where he led a very dissipated life, the manners of his college being at that time extremely dissolute. He took his first honors, however, and went home greatly in debt. Mr. Allen refused to pay some of his debts of honor, and he hastily quitted the country on a quixotic expedition to join the Greeks, then struggling for liberty. He did not reach his original destination, however, but made his way to St. Petersburg in Russia, where he became involved in difficulties, from which he was extricated by the late Mr. Henry Middleton, the American minister at that capital. He returned home in 1829 and immediately afterward entered the military academy at West Point. So it's very interesting. He's saying that Poe was in St. Petersburg in Russia, where he had this encounter with this guy, Mr. Henry Middleton, who someone that we encourage people to look up as we're doing research on this. And there's some other things I want to show, but the main question I think to establish is, was Poe in Europe? For how long would he have been there? And when would he have had the opportunity to do it? So Griswold had said that Poe had attended university at Charlottesville. This is just an account by some of the students who had attended there with Poe, and I'll just read that real quickly. This was 1826, denying the account of a fellow student, Thomas Good Tucker, that he and Poe were roommates and had a fight. Miles George wrote E.V. Valentine, and this was in May of 1880. Poe and myself were at no time roommates, therefore he did not leave me or I him. Poe roomed on the west side of the lawn, I on the east. He afterwards moved to the western range. I was often in both rooms and recalled the many happy hours spent therein. Of the pugilistic combat so minutely described, I have some recollection. It was a boyish freak or frolic, and both fight and the feeling in which it originated were by consent buried in oblivion, never again to be revived. Poe, as has been said, was fond of quoting poetic authors and reading poetic productions of his own, with which his friends were delighted and entertained. Then suddenly a change would come over him, and he would, with a piece of charcoal, evince his versatile genius by sketching upon the walls of his dormitory whimsical, fanciful, and grotesque figures, with so much artistic skill as to leave us in doubt whether Poe in future life would be painter or poet. He was very excitable and restless, at times wayward, melancholic, and morose, but again in his better moods frolicsome, full of fun, and a most attractive and agreeable companion. So this is a description of Poe as a student. You can already see that he's already writing poetry at this time, and he's doing artistic productions, this thing of drawing whimsical and fanciful, grotesque figures. So later, in May of 1826, Poe goes on to meet another character by the name of Peter Pindar Peace. As a boy, old Peace was apprenticed to an itinerant saddler, Herman Tucker by name, and shortly before the early 30s arrived at Charlottesville, Virginia, where the worthy harness maker opened the shop, and my great-uncle Peace became his assistant. Trade was pretty brisk, and soon the little shop expanded into a sort of curio store filled with second-hand articles, including a library which had fallen under the auctioneer's hammer in order to satisfy a plantation debt, and so came into the possession of Tucker. Among these books were a rare edition of Hogarth's Prince, and this work the young assistant resolved to purchase on the installment plan from his employer. 2 small payments had been made when Poe, then attending the college there, happened into the shop one day, noticed the book, and desired to buy it. Upon Tucker's telling Poe that his clerk was attempting to purchase the work out of his meager earnings, the poet asked to be made known to my great-uncle, and thus their acquaintance began. Poe immediately invited young Peel. Next evening, the call was made, and after some parley, Poe suggested that they gamble for the book, agreeing to pay Peter the full price, which Tucker asked in case he lost. So you can see here there's a sort of account of Poe gambling and meeting Peter Peace. He would later go on to meet Poe again in New England, and Poe had left the university in December of 1826. I won't go on to read the full account there, but after he leaves, Poe enlists in the army. This is May of 1827. On May 26, 1827, Edgar Allan Poe, under the alias of Edgar A. Perry, enlisted as a private in the U.S. Army. Thus began a curious, lesser-known chapter in the life of one of America's greatest writers. In less than a year serving in the 1st Artillery Regiment, Poe was promoted to the unit's artificer. As artificer, both officer and gun crews relied on him to craft the artillery bombs properly and oversee the ammunition supply for the battery. Within 7 months, Poe would be selected from the regiment's nearly 500 authorized enlisted men to become. So this is May 1827. He's at first stationed at Fort Independence, Boston Harbor, which goes along with the account by Peace that he had met him in New England. So, and he's in the Army from May of 1827 to April 1829. And then about a year later, in July 1830, he enters West Point, and then he leaves March 6, 1831. So I guess the basic thing to describe here is that there's a year apart between April 1829 and July of 1830, where Poe could have been in Europe. He could have been in St. Petersburg, going along with this timeline that we had described by Griswold. So I think that's just something to be investigated. And I'll just leave it there, Dennis, if you have anything to say about that.
Well, I don't have anything to say about that. I think what's important is that there's a period of time that is not accounted for that is approximately a year or more. Now, there is a later period, and therefore, and Poe would have been at this period of time less than 20 years old, or just 20 years old. And the idea is that we are told that the ambassador to Russia was forced to get Poe out of Russia in St. Petersburg. This is referenced by Rufus Griswold, as was said a moment ago, who is an enemy of Poe, but nonetheless claims or asserts that Poe was in fact in Europe at that time. All right. So that's 18. Why don't you give the dates for that again, Kynan? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Why don't you just give the dates that he would not give the dates for the time period that's unaccounted for?
Yeah, that's April 1829 and to July of 1830.
Okay. All right. So we're saying that Poe, between the ages of 20 and 21, may have been in Europe. And we are told by his enemy that he was in Europe. So now what's interesting is that there's a story from 1832, much later, in other words, not this period of time, in which it is said that Edgar Poe was in the company of Alexandre Dumas, a French writer, well known for writing The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, who was also very much associated with the Marquis de Lafayette. He was important, without getting into details about it. Alexandre Dumas' father, who was Haitian and was a general in the French army, had preceded him. And so he was a well-known figure in France. And in fact, other than Victor Hugo, probably the most famous author in French history, at least up until through the 19th century. And there's a document in which it is stated by him that Poe was in Paris. Now, sometime about 2010, there was a writing that claimed that this was also a forgery, that in fact someone had tried to pawn this story off. They had claimed that this was true, but that this had been used in a form of a hoax against Poe. Do you have that there or not?
No, I don't right now.
Okay, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to send you that. And what we're going to do is read a story from Poe. And the story that we're going to read is said to have been published in 1835, but seems to have been written about 2 years earlier. Depending on who you look on you read, the story is written 2 years earlier. The story is called Shadow, a Parable, and it's pretty short, and it's written so people know what a parable is a short story, usually often spoken orally, in which you're trying to teach a meaning by using another kind of story. So this story, Shadow, is called both a fable, as you're seeing it there. It's also called a parable. And so, Jose, can you start us off on that, reading that?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
We got it up on the screen so people can read along, right?
Yep.
Okay, great.
All righty. Shadow, a fable. Ye who read are still among the living, but I who write shall have long since gone my way into the region of shadows. For indeed strange things shall happen, and secret things be known, and many centuries shall pass away ere these memorials be seen of men. And when seen there will be some to disbelieve and some to doubt, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon in the characters here graven with a stylus of iron. The year had been a year of terror, and of feelings more intense than terror, for which there is no name upon the earth. For many prodigies and signs had taken place, and far and wide over sea and land, the black wings of the pestilence were spread abroad. To those, nevertheless, cunning in the stars, it was not unknown that the heavens wore an aspect of ill. And to me, the Greek oinos, among others, it was evident that now had arrived the alternation of that 794th year, when, at the entrance of Aries, the planet Jupiter is conjoined with the red ring of the terrible Saturnus. The peculiar spirit of the skies, if I mistake not greatly, made itself manifest, not only in the physical orb of the earth, but in the souls, imaginations, and meditations of mankind. Over some flasks of the red Chian wine, within the walls of a noble hall, in a dim city called Ptolemais, we sat at night, a company of 7. Into our chamber there was no entrance save by a lofty door of brass, and the door was fashioned by the artisan Corinos, and, being of rare workmanship, was fastened from within. Black draperies, likewise, in the gloomy room, shut out from our view the moon, the lurid stars, and the peopleless streets. But the boding and the memory of evil, they would not be so excluded. There were things around us, and about of which I can render no distinct account. Things material and spiritual, heaviness in the atmosphere, a sense of suffocation, anxiety, and above all, that terrible state of existence which the nervous experience when the senses are keenly living and awake, and meanwhile the powers of thought lie dormant. A dead weight hung upon us. It hung upon our limbs, upon the household furniture, upon the goblets which we drank, and all things were depressed and borne down thereby. All things save only the flames of the 7 iron lamps which illumined our revel. Uproaring themselves in tall, slender lines of light, they thus remained burning all pallid and motionless. And in the mirror which their luster formed upon the round table of ebony at which we sat, each of us there assembled beheld the pallor of his own countenance, and the unquiet glare and the downcast eyes of his companions. Yet we laughed and were merry in our proper way, which was hysterical, and sang the songs of Anacreon, which are madness, and drank deeply, although the purple wine reminded us of blood, for there was yet another tenant of our chamber in the person of young Zoilus. Dead and at full length he lay, enshrouded, the genius and the demon of the scene. Alas, he bore no portion in our mirth, save that his countenance distorted with the plague, and his eyes, in which death had but half extinguished the fire of its pestilence, seemed to take such interest in our merriment as the dead may haply take in the merriment of those who are to die. But although I, Oinos, felt that the eyes of the departed were upon me, still I forced myself not to perceive the bitterness of their expression, and gazing down steadily into the depths of the ebony mirror, sang with a loud and sonorous voice the songs of the son of Teos. But gradually my songs they ceased, and their echoes, rolling afar off among the sable draperies of the chamber, became weak and indistinguishable, and so fainted away. And lo, from among those sable draperies, where the sounds of the song departed, there came forth a dark and undefined shadow, a shadow such as the moon, when low in heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man. But it was the shadow neither of man nor of God, nor of any familiar thing. And quivering a while among the draperies of the room, it at length rested in full view upon the surface of the door of brass. But the shadow was vague and formless and indefinitive, and was the shadow neither of man nor God, neither God of Greece, nor God of Chaldea, nor any Egyptian god. And the shadow rested upon the brazen doorway and under the arc of the entablature of the door, and moved not, nor spoke any word, but there became stationary and remained. And the door whereupon the shadow rested was, if I remember aright, over against the feet of the word, over against the feet of the young Zoilus enshrouded. But we, the 7 there assembled, having seen the shadow as it came out from among the draperies, dared not steadily behold it, but cast down our eyes and gazed continually into the depths of the mirror of ebony. And at length I, Oinos, speaking some low words, demanded of the shadow its dwelling and its appellation. And the shadow answered, I am shadow, and my dwelling is near to the catacombs of Ptolemais, and hard by those dim plains of Helusion, which border upon the foul Coronian canal. And then did we, the 7, start from our seats in horror, and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast, for the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any one being, but of a multitude of beings, and varying in their cadences from syllable to syllable, fell duskily upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends.
That's the whole thing.
Yep.
So it's a parable. That's what they call it, or they call it a fable. So what are we dealing with? Let's start from the beginning.
So this is just from the beginning. This is a this is a retelling of something that happened, right? So, and he says that ye who read are still among the living, but I who write shall have long since gone my way into the region of shadows. Basically, he's saying, well, it's kind of obvious what he's just saying there, right? This isn't, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I've died. And this is for you, the future.
Yes, though it doesn't actually start there. It starts before that. It says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow.
Oh, our version doesn't have that. Hold on.
You sure?
Yeah, on the screen it doesn't.
Okay, yeah, okay. So now this is a general theme we have hit many times, which everybody should know, which is that you have different versions of these Poe stories. Several of them are butchered. You can find them online. You can find the right ones online, but you often may not. And so the very first, it's like a motto for the story, okay? And it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow. And it does attribute that to the 23rd Psalm of David. That's the one, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Yeah.
For people that know that one, right? He leadeth me in the green pastures, he restoreth my soul. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I think it's for thou art with me, and continues from that. Thy rod, yeah, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff will comfort me. So the first thing we want to know is the first thing, the indicator he gives us is that he's referring to that parable. Okay, so go on. So then you just said something which is important. If you're reading this, I'm dead.
Basically.
I've been dead for a long time. Okay. What's the next thing we have?
Okay.
Many centuries shall pass away before these memorials be seen of men. So actually, he's saying that if we're reading this, it's a long time ago that this story happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then he's giving a sort of a warning, and when seen here, there will be some to disbelieve and some to doubt, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon in the characters here graven with a stylus of iron.
Just means like it's a writing instrument. Stylus is a writing instrument.
Or like a pen, right?
Pen, right. If you want to think about it that way. Right. So then he goes on and talks about the year being a year of terror, feelings more intense than terror, for which there is no name upon the earth. For many prodigies and signs had taken place, and far and wide. And he talks about the pestilence that was spread. Well, for those of us who lived through COVID, we have some idea about that. He says the Greek oinos. Well, now that's a name that refers, we've heard that name before in other of the dialogues, oinos and agathos being one. The power words is a dialogue. We've heard that name before. And I think probably there's a couple of others that are referred to here. Now, some people say, I've said oinos means wine. Some people also say that it can refer to the one or one. So either way, people want to think about it. By the way, in terms of plague, the thing to know is that there was a plague at the time of the final fall of the Roman Empire. That's a sort of important time. On Emperor Justinian. This is the Eastern division of the Roman Empire. It was in like some people say it was 525, some people say it's 542. But it's clear that in any case, one thing this story is referring to is a decline. That's for sure. Okay, go ahead.
Let's see where we're talking about the pestilence, right? It was. Oh, go ahead.
It was evident that now had arrived the alternation of that 794th year when, at the entrance of Aries, the planet Jupiter is conjoined with the red ring of the terrible Saturnus.
Yeah, this refers not to an actual event, but when you have a conjunction of this, some of this stuff is in notes. Jupiter and Saturn that's a mean that you're going to have a change. But if it happens in the sign of Aries, the ram, it means it's going to be a violent change. You got misfortune. What people, it's a really bad time is basically being forecast. And there was some book that Poe read, which was called The Mathematics. It's a section in an encyclopedia which talked about this idea of every 794 years, this particular conjunction of planets in an astrological sign happens. So go ahead.
And he says, yeah, this peculiar spirit of the skies, if I mistake not greatly, made itself manifest not only in the physical orb of the earth, but in the soul's imaginations and meditations of mankind.
Well, sorry.
Just keep going.
Yeah, just keep going, because remember, you guys got to read it, not me.
Over some flask of the red Chian wine, within the walls of a noble hall in a dim city called Ptolemais, we sat at night, a company of 7.
Now, a couple things to say here. There were different cities with that name, but one of them was on the Red Sea. And Ptolemy just talked about the idea that for 90 days in the summer, you wouldn't see the sun at noon. It cast no shadow. Well, actually, the sun generally, as we know, those of us who studied Eratosthenes, that's what you're expecting, is that there's going to be no shadow. But nonetheless, it's a significant reference. And this place is a Greek island, which was called Chios, which was known for its wine. So this the Chian wine, that's what it refers to. Chios. Okay, go ahead.
And to our chamber there was no entrance save by a lofty door of brass, and the door was fashioned by the artisan Corinos, and being of rare workmanship, was fastened from within.
Yeah, there's nobody particularly by that name known, but obviously he's saying that the door is fastened from inside. So, go ahead.
Black draperies, likewise, in the gloomy room, shut out from our view the moon, the lurid stars, and the peopleless streets. But the boding and the memory of evil, they would not be so excluded. There were things around us and about of which I can render no distinct account, things material and spiritual, heaviness in the atmosphere, a sense of suffocation, anxiety, and above all, that terrible state of existence which the nervous experience when the senses are keenly living and awake, and meanwhile the powers of thought lie dormant.
This is sort of a theme we've heard many times now with Poe, right? First of all, the thing about all the light being shut out, that runs through Murders in the Rue Morgue, runs through other stories. And then this idea that the senses are keenly awake, but the mind is not working. We had that in The Pit and the Pendulum, and some other stories. Just want to reference that for people. Okay, go ahead.
A dead weight hung upon us. It hung upon our limbs, upon the household furniture, upon the goblets from which we drank, and all things were depressed and borne down thereby. All things save only the flames of the 7 iron lamps which illumined our revel. Uprearing themselves in tall, slender lines of light, they thus remained, burning all pallid and motionless. And in the mirror which their luster formed upon the round table of ebony at which we sat, each of us there assembled beheld the pallor of his own countenance and the unquiet glare in the downcast eyes of his companions.
Sorry.
What were you guys?
Well, because the next sentence says, "Yet we laughed and were merry in our proper way." It reminds it's the Mask of the Red Death. Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, these people have freaked out. Definitely, everything feels heavy, but they're claiming to be having some sort of party. They're all there. I mean, there's 7 of them. They're there. They're all right doing something. In fact, what is happening? I guess we want to continue to read a little bit so that people can make sure we even see what this is about. We know we're in a chamber. It's dark. It's got a big brass door, and apparently there's a plague outside. Okay.
You can keep going, okay.
Yet we laughed and were merry in our proper way, which was hysterical, and sang the songs of Anacreon, which are madness, and drank deeply, although the purple wine reminded us of blood.
Yeah, so Anacreon was an actual poet. I think he was 6th century but that was very early, 6th century BC. Okay, so the time frame here is definitely moving between Egypt, ancient Egypt times, ancient Greek times, and then the fall of the Roman Empire. It could be any of those times. So it's like over any course of 1,000 years, 500 BC to 500 AD. Go ahead.
For there was yet another tenant of our chamber in the person of young Zoilus. Dead, and at full length he lay enshrouded, the genius and the demon of the scene. Alas, he bore no portion in our mirth, save that his countenance, distorted with the plague, and his eyes, in which death had but half extinguished the fire of the pestilence, seemed to take such interest in our merriment as the dead may haply take in the merriment of those who are to die. But although I, Oinos, felt that the eyes of the departed were upon me, still I forced myself not to perceive the bitterness of their expression.
Oh my God.
And gazing down steadily into the depths of the ebony mirror, sang with a long and sonorous voice the songs of the son of Teos. But gradually my songs they ceased, and their echoes, rolling afar off among the sable draperies of the chamber, became weak and indistinguishable, and so fainted away. And lo, from among those sable draperies where the sounds of the song departed, there came forth a dark and undefined shadow, a shadow such as the moon, when low in heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man. But it was the shadow neither of man, nor of God, nor of any familiar thing.
So let's make sure we understand what's going on. So when he says the ebony mirror, what's he talking about?
He's talking about the mirror that's reflecting the light of the 7 candles, right?
Yeah, but what is he saying? Is this a table that he's staring into that's so well polished that it's like this ebony and you can see yourself in it? Is that?
Oh, I thought it was like an ebony frame that's holding up a mirror. I didn't consider that it might be a very well polished ebony table.
Because there's a bunch of people sitting around it, right?
Right.
Isn't that what
That's right. Right. Okay. If it's really like well polished, you can see yourself in the table.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure people are clear about it. So they're all sitting there and they're basically drinking. We don't hear too much about food, actually. We know there's a lot of wine. We know this is wine from this Kynos, this island, right? And they're sitting there, and there's a corpse there. And the corpse has just died from the plague. In fact, the corpse is basically like almost still warm. Corpses don't really stay warm, as people may know who've ever had that occasion.
Yeah.
But that's what's being said here, that you can still see in the eyes of the corpse this brightness. Right? And they're singing, and they're all trying to act like they feel cool and everything is good, but they don't really. They have some ominous sense about stuff. Okay, go ahead.
And quivering a while among the draperies of the room, it at length rested in full view upon the surface of the door of brass. But the shadow was vague and formless and indefinitive, and was the shadow neither of man nor God, neither God of Greece nor God of Chaldea, nor any Egyptian god. And the shadow rested upon the brazen doorway, and under the arch of the entablature of the door, and moved not, nor spoke any word, but there became stationary and remained. And the door whereupon the shadow rested was, if I remember aright, over against the feet of the young Zoilus enshrouded. But we, the 7 there assembled, having seen the shadow as it came out from among the draperies, dared not steadily behold it, but cast down our eyes, and gazed continually into the depths of the mirror of ebony. And at length I, Oinos, speaking some low words, demanded of the shadow its dwelling and its appellation. And the shadow answered, I am Shadow, and my dwelling is near to the catacombs of Ptolemais, and hard by those dim plains of Halcyon, which border upon the foul Charonian's canal. And then did we, the 7,
start. Okay, hold on. Don't go so far right now. Just stop there for a minute. So now we know they're saying it's not a guy from Egypt. It's not a guy from Chaldea. That's basically southern Iraq today. It was an area which was like kind of called Mesopotamia then, but it's southern Iraq. It's not a god anybody knows, and so, but so they're wondering who is this, and then we get this description, and it's not exactly clear, but several different places are mentioned. The foul Charonian canal. There's the god Charon, who god Charon. He's basically the escort into the realm of death. So the Charonian canal refers to that. Just wanted to say that. Go ahead.
And then did we, the 7, start from our seats in horror and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast. For the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any one being, but of a multitude of beings, and varying in their cadences from syllable to syllable, fell duskily upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends.
Okay, so what happens? Why is he terrified? Why are all these people terrified?
Because reality has caught up to them. The shadow is here.
Because they recognize the voice as being of their own departed friends, right?
Yeah, that says there that the cadences change syllable to syllable, and are not the tones of any one being, but a multitude of beings. The well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends. They're about to join that chorus.
Yeah.
Mm. And so therefore they're not really hearing an individual voice. There's not even 2 people talking, not 3, not 4. They say a multitude.
Right.
Okay, so Pope wrote this, and he wouldn't have been older than 26, and he may have written it by the time he was 23 or 24. Because you can't tell, like I said, the first mention I've seen of the story is in 1833. The publishing date on this one is 1835. And of course, if you've written something, you may have if it's a final draft, even a first draft, it means it's been worked on for some time. So it's reasonable to at least ask whether he was 23 years old or slightly older when he wrote it. It's also important to ask why he wrote it. But there's one thing I think we can say about it. We're at 7 o'clock now, so I want to be very brief here, is to say it is about the collapse of empire.
Okay. I see.
Anything else you take away from this, for sure, you cannot think it's controversial to say this is about the collapse of empire.
Oh, wow. I was just thinking about the parallels to Romeo and Juliet, because in that story, and also in a lot of other Shakespeare plays, there's a lot of references to the stars dictating destiny, but also the whole play, Romeo and Juliet, is about the it's about a plague that comes at the end and wipes out their society after all the young people are dead too, because they forgot, or at least they didn't bother to care about them or to care about the plague. And it's also another tale of a falling empire.
That's an interesting observation, because of course nobody ever points out that that's actually the subject of the play.
Right. And also the beginning of Poe, where he, like, it reminded me of the prologue of Romeo and Juliet, because he says here, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon in the characters here graven with a stylus of iron. He's basically saying, like, but some of you will hopefully see the point of this. And in the prologue to Romeo and Juliet, the two households, both alike in dignity, he says at the end, he says, hold on, let me find the exact thing from the prologue. Well, sure, actually, I'll read the whole prologue. He says, he's enter chorus, two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. So there's one reference, star-crossed, means they're guided by the stars, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife, their fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. And then he says, the which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So basically he's saying, if you didn't get in the prologue, hopefully the play will make it clear to you what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, exactly. And so also see the point of the Poe business when he says it's written with a stylus of iron, because it's got to prevail. It's got to be there, because somebody's got to finally learn the lesson of this. So in other words, the writer is committed to somebody learning this lesson, a lesson which clearly he didn't learn, his colleagues didn't learn. He's sitting there singing, etc., trying to get past it all. But upon hearing these voices of the departed friends, upon entering the valley of the shadow, has decided to make sure you, right, may not merely enter into the valley of the shadow. That much, at least, I think we can conclude is there. So let's maybe wrap it up at this point, Jose, and you go ahead. And
Yeah. No, of course. Everyone should. First of all, I saw $25 came in. I want to thank whoever did that. I'll review it in just a second and give you a call after this. But I want to thank all of you for tuning in. If you can donate to help us reach our goal of $25,000 by New Year's, we're just halfway there. Please consider donating at votevega.nyc, and I strongly recommend you go and tune in to Diane Sayre's show, which she's doing right now on the LaRouche Organization YouTube channel. So with that being said, thank you all.